So I'm going to continue with A Wizard of Earthsea. After he creates this rift, the Archmage dies. He's in the hospital for a long time. And pretty much this is going to be the end, more or less the end of his schooling. He stays, it's just a brief few passages, but we learn that he stays and finishes a large portion of his education. And then he becomes much more humble after this. And this is where we learn that without that pride, without that sense of arrogance, motivating all his actions, he actually begins to learn a little slower. So yeah, you could think of that as pride being synonymous with power. But you could also think of it as once Ged learns some humility, he understands the importance of smaller things. And we do see this later, right? So he learns patience, right? He wanted to gloss over the illusions, even though illusions helped him fight off the Karks. And he wanted to get to real tangible stuff, like powerful stuff. But now he kind of is starting to understand the importance of those basics, the importance of the rudimental. And there's an interesting line that we get. The truth is that as a man's real power grows and his knowledge widens, ever the way that he can follow grows narrower, until at last he chooses nothing, but does only and wholly what he must do. So this is really what everyone has kind of been trying to teach Ged in some form. As you gain more and more power, you need to be learning an equal amount of self-restraint, an equal amount of caution. Sometimes there are moments where you must do these things. And as Ged is kind of finishing up on Roke, he feels unfree. He feels like he doesn't really have a choice in this. It's interesting that right after this big moment of failure, right, and if you think about it, think about the scale of this failure. He got someone killed and released ignorance and pride and havoc into the world in the form of his shadow in order to prove some kid at his school wrong, to seem tough, to seem cool. That's what it's being referred to. He feels unfree. Originally, it was destiny. This is the way the world is balanced. This is what I want. But now it's, maybe I had a choice, but didn't use it correctly. And because of that, maybe I'm not free like I thought. And also this idea of the shadow just represents the problems that Ged caused when he did that. He killed the Archmage by accident, sure. He nearly got himself killed by performing this really terrible feat of magic. And now that's escaped into the world, but you can really think of it when he caused this destruction is now being embodied in this idea of a shadow, because that destruction was caused by his ego and his arrogance. Ged, at the school, he's much more humble. He finishes out his education, and he has this uplifting moment with Vetch knows that there's like good inside of Ged, and he knows, okay, he's not just this complete evil thing. He just needs to be on the right path. He sees this as well. So he entrusts Ged with his actual name. And once again, this is very important. If you give someone your real name, then they have a lot of power over you. They have potentially power to manipulate you. And so giving someone your name out in this world is the ultimate show of trust. And Ged also returns the favor. He gives him his name. And there's an interesting scene where he's leaving, and the doorman is like, in order to leave here, to finalize your education, you need to find a way to discern my name, and then I'll let you leave. And so all these things go through Ged's head. And what are the first things that go through his head? Well, deceiving him, tricking him, acting duplicitously. He even considers using force, to pull it from him. And then he's like, you know what? What if I just tried asking him first? What if I started there? What if I didn't go straight to power? And so he asks him, and he gives him his name. And he's like, you did well. He gets like, wow, okay. He doesn't actually say he did. But as he's leaving, he does talk to the Archmage, and the Archmage warns him that, hey, this thing is coming for you. And Ged decides to leave the school, and once he leaves, he realizes that the winds are just too strong again. But this time, he realized, I can't go back. Symbolically, what this represents is that he can no longer run from the ignorance, from his ego. He can't just go sit in isolation and safety and pretend that it's not a thing. And he can no longer return to a previous state of pretending that he didn't have an ego. That's why he can't return. So the first thing Get does is like goes on a few little travels. He wants to go to some place that doesn't have anything ostentatious about it. He just wants like a simple job. And he goes to this small town, a little fisher village. There's a scene where a child is dying. And he's like, oh, I'll try to help him. I'll do whatever I can. And he does his best. He can't save him. And I think this is one of those first realizations for Get. Wow, I'm still powerful. I couldn't even save one kid from death. And yet I thought I was just going to go cause whatever havoc I want, reveling, hanging out, and just fix everything. But he realized like there's no such thing as that much power. It just doesn't exist. If you disturb the balance, you ruin the balance. In order to help the fisherman, he learns too that they have a problem with the dragon. So he goes and he confronts this dragon. And the dragon is actually really cool. The dragons in this are extremely powerful. And they seem deceptive, wise, and calculating. So he's kind of confronting this dragon. And there's a point where the dragon's like, hey, let me level with you, Get. And Get's like, I don't know. What do you got? And so the dragon's like, well, I know the name of the thing that's chasing you. And Get's like, how does the dragon even know this? And he's like, I'll tell you. This is a challenge for Get, because this could be the choice between selfish. Hey, there's this shadow chasing. If I tell this dragon to give me the name, that's probably the only deal that I can make with this dragon. He gives me the name, I leave. I just leave these poor fishermen susceptible to this dragon's, attacks. Because it's like attacking the village. He's mean. The dragon's not a good dragon. And I don't know, maybe he realizes, no, if I only get one thing, if I can ask this dragon for one thing, I need to make the selfless decision, the altruistic decision. So he says, he doesn't take it. He says no. And he knows his name, so he bargains with him. He's like, I know your name. You still might be able to kill me, but I know your name, so I might be able to kill you. Just do this one thing for me. Don't attack that village. And the dragon agrees to it. And this is definitely an uplifting moment for him because, he chose the path of selflessness. So he's out in Oromie and a wizard shows up. And he's like, hey, you need to go to this place. And Get's kind of like, all right. He's just like, all right, that's just how wizards are. They just show up, they say weird things, and then other wizards like, okay, that's what they do. But it's interesting. As he's on the boat, on his way, he doesn't have any gold. So what does he do? He consents to row. This is all part of an internal learning experience. Instead of scoffing at this, he settles for the contrite position. This is the internal development that he's going to need to be able to accept that he himself has a problem, that this shadow exists because he has a problem. And all the scenes that I just talked about, the child, the dragon attack, and meeting the wizard and making this whole journey, they're all very interesting. Once again, I do wish there was a little more to him. I wish there had been more scene development at the Fisher Village, more conversations with the kid's parents of the kid who passed away. Maybe a longer conflict with the dragon could have been interesting. So once Ged left Roke, he realized he couldn't remain in personal ignorance of his own faults. So that represented him recognizing the problem. One of the first scenes right after that, when he was saving the kid, the shadow encounters him and Ged flees. When he goes to the dragon, in his mind, to face the dragon, in his mind he's like, well, I'd rather face this dragon than this shadow. The first thing I think that represents is that sometimes it's actually easier to face external conflicts than it is to accept that you have an internal problem. Then he goes to Oromie. And what is he doing? Well, he's just moving around, but this is significant because internally what he's doing is running from his shadow now. So he's accepted that there's a problem. Sure, that's when he left Rope. But now he's seeking out ways to flee from it. He doesn't want to face it. So that's what this represents psychologically, running from the problem. After taking this wizard and Oromie's advice, he ends up heading toward Turin. So he meets a person named Skior. And Skior He makes a few comments to him. I think one is kind of like how Ged doesn't have a knife. But what's happening is he's very much playing to Ged's sense of pride. He's challenging his toughness. Why are you acting so weak? You know, why you don't even carry a knife? And whereas before, Ged would have very much reacted negatively to this, and there probably would have been some sort of a challenge. Ged this time, maintains composure, and for some weird reason, this Skior then agrees to lead Ged to the Tower of Turin. So Ged accepts cautiously. I don't know, maybe halfway there, or very near to the tower, probably more than halfway. I don't know why I said that. Skior turns on Ged and pulls back his hood, and there's nothing there. And Ged realizes oh, this is my shadow. So he pulls back his hood and they fight. And Ged tries to hit him with his staff, and instead of burning the creature, Ged gets burned. I mean, he doesn't understand why, but really just attacked himself. He hit his own pride, right? He wounded his pride. So Ged just can't handle it. And now we just get this literal run from his shadow, from himself. He just flees. He runs straight to the Tower of Turin, where he believes he will be safe, and the shadow doesn't pursue. And then I want to bring back one interesting part that occurs. What led him here again? Well, it was that wizard in Ormi, and he had kind of told him hey, there might be something that you're seeking there. You should go. And there's this subtle line that insinuates that Ged had a sort of an idea of what the wizard was referring to. So it was almost like he was grasping at an idea, I feel like I know what this wizard's talking about, but I can't quite put a finger on it. Yeah, maybe I'll go. And I do kind of wonder if maybe what that represented was that in running away from his own fear, he had kind of distanced himself from a side of himself. Ged was reaching for memories that he no longer has, because he's trying to repress these ideas. He's trying to, maybe there was something that he had been seeking. There were things that he did want to seek, but now he's repressed all that. He's following this shred of evidence that he can't quite put a finger on. When he gets to Turin, what happens? Well, there's a shadow there that literally leads him. So from the perspective of the internal conflict, well, what was kind of happening here was he was actually being led by his pride still. However repressed it was, he couldn't put a finger on it because he was pretending it wasn't there. He was repressing it, pushing it away, dismissing it. And it turns out, even though I'm running from it, I'm still driven by those same emotions, right? I'm still driven by my pride. That's what I'm being led by. I'm being led by my arrogance, my old envious self. So this tower is the Tower of Turin, and it turns out that Seret, the Enchantress's daughter from the beginning, but she's the lady of the Lord of Turin. So Ged wakes up there, and we get this line. He had come to this tower keep by chance, and yet the chance was all design. Or he had come by design, and yet all the design had merely chanced to come about. And there are so many lines like this in the book. It is very neat. One thing I want to bring back was that whole idea of Ged feeling unfree, right? Originally he thought it was his destiny to have this moment, to prove everybody wrong, to be the greatest wizard of all time. But then he started to realize, well, maybe I feel unfree, I don't get to make decisions. Well, why does he feel unfree? Well, because he's being driven by one singular emotion, and those emotions are negative. Well, maybe it's more than one, but it's a few emotions like pride, envy. So if you think of the scope of all possible emotions, Ged's only selecting a few, and those have become the preponderance of the decision-making ability. It's like an unfair balance within him. If you are driven by these very few small negative emotions, are you really free? Well, I think that's what he's feeling. No, he's not free, because in order to be the freest you could possibly be, you would need to have a balanced emotional set. You would need that, and that would put you at your most rational, the most likely to make any decision that needed to be made. Whereas Ged always follows pride, right? He always was arrogant. Of course he was going to start the fight with Jasper. That's why he thought it was his destiny, because he wasn't free. So what is he learning here? Well, he's going to have to learn to balance out his emotions inside.